Nice of you to drop by. So many people click off. Hi, I'm Claire and welcome back. Today let's look at the connection between two unlikely language siblings, the dagger and the high heel. And it all starts with a flamboyant stiletto. Named after the diminutive of stilo, which means dagger in Italian, the stiletto has a long, thin blade, narrow cross-section, and is relatively small. Ignore this one because it's definitely not a stiletto, it's massive.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
But let's get to the point. The sword point, and the stiletto's point is very sharp, designed to stab. Unlike some daggers designed with a specific cutting edge for cutting and slashing motions, the stiletto emerged from a simple design flaw in the late Middle Ages in Europe. Does this ever happen to you? Is your dagger simply too weak to slash through your enemy's protective clothing due to tougher, harder armour? Fed up of losing against plate armour with all their pesky steel? There's got to be another way. Introducing the thrusting dagger by Dagger Design Evolution Limited. Don't question the lore of this fake infomercial too much. Thanks to its new thrusting, super precise technology, you can find a gap in armor plating, in your opponent's helmet, and live long enough to question your life choices. Thrusting daggers come in a range of designs, including the fashionable stiletto, whose tip is designed for optimal penetration without any additional friction. Thank you, Dagger Design Evolution. Now get out of my house. So many daggers at that time lost their cutting edge, but in doing so they gained an edgier reputation. The stiletto was specifically designed to be discreet and deadly with needle-like precision. While it would have been a secondary weapon in battle to a sword, its efficiency and discretion, especially against a person in normal, non-armoured clothing in everyday life, made it the weapon of choice for assassins. Imagine you're designing a character. Little guy is treacherous and deceptive, prone to using wits rather than strength, with quick moves and sneak attacks. Are you more likely to give him a knightly longsword used in face-to-face combat, or a small dagger prone to backstabbing? This design choice is the same one that has been given to figures across fiction and legend within literature, film and comics. Characters like Loki, and I actually did a whole video featuring the weaponry he uses in mythology, comics and on screen, which you can see not the right place on my screen, right here. One of the depictions make it apparent that the high heel stiletto in more ways than just the same name. But let's actually first talk about how the high heel ended up in this situation. There were already versions of high heels even as our stiletto blade was being used. One example in the 15th century is the chopine, a disco platform boot but make it early Renaissance Europe, whose design reached 20 inches or 50 centimeters, because I have been raised in France and I refuse to use the inch system. But then in the 17th century, new Persian influences reached Europe and bring with them a more distinctive high heel used by riders back in Persia. The court became obsessed, especially since men's fashion at the time was all about showing your legs. I mean, just look at the paintings from the period. The guys were all about those shapely gams. This is a leg montage in case I want to add more legs from different paintings. You're welcome, people who like men in tights. But as women in Europe started wearing high heels as well to embrace a more masculine look, that's when their heels started getting higher and men's were broader and shorter to start creating this gender distinction. Before the French Revolution happens and makes heels for men quite a fashion faux pas. Unless you wanted to look aristocratic in revolutionary France, which, trust me, you didn't. After all, Louis XV, the one before the one who got beheaded, had even passed a special edict that heels were only for the court, and their impractical height was also a sign that you were so wealthy that you didn't need practical shoes. Add to that anti-noble frivolity climate the arrival of new menswear conventions with no pastels, no frills, and certainly no heels. And no fun. But the heel wasn't over for women in mainstream fashion. By the 20th century, high heels were still going strong, but still made of less solid fabric that meant that your shoe's heel would crack above a certain height and still needed some chunk to them. Until Italian shoe designer Salvatore Ferragamo, who made the iconic red slippers in The Wizard of Oz, designed by Adrian, an iconic American costume designer who was openly gay in Hollywood despite his marriage with a woman, which was thought to be a lavender marriage, as in they were both queer and needed a cover for each other. Just another high-heeled addition to the gay euphemism of being a friend of Dorothy. Ferragamo discovered how to design steel arches for the insteps of his shoes to give them that iconic height and thinness. In the 60s, the elongation of the stiletto's shoe's toes made for an even thinner, more elongated look, leading up to Manolo Blahnik's new version of the stiletto in 1974, the needle. But this still wasn't making any sense. I had been on this case for days. Apart from the fact that the high heel is elongated needle-like, what was their deeper connection with the dagger? That's when they came into the room. They were all heels. I mean, they were literally a pair of heels. That's when I realised I was in a low-budget film noir pastiche video segment. The high heel has become a staple of the femme fatale, alongside lipstick and the black dress. It symbolises dangerous, weaponized femininity.
They say the female of the species is deadlier than the male.
And just in the same way a femme fatale could disguise other intentions, or a small revolver in her purse.
You're not well, Claire.
I'm all right. I didn't mean to crack up. At least we could have a farewell drink together. No hard feelings, really. Why don't you fix some for us?
I must say you're being regular about it.
She could also disguise a dagger, because going back in time from Renaissance Europe onwards, when the dagger became associated with unsavory personalities, it also took on gendered connotations as well, because the longsword doesn't just represent a perceived honour of face-to-face combat, it represents an ideal of virtuous, conventional masculinity. So the dagger, by contrast, could become a visual shorthand to express an unsavoury character lacking these traditionally masculine, virtuous qualities of courage and chivalry in facing their opponents head-on. Used for male fictional characters who would be considered cowardly and unmanly, and also when it came to bladed ladies. This was to some extent due to the assumption that women wouldn't be able to fight with swords. To be fair, some of them didn't. That was the case with the recorded duel between Mademoiselle de Guigne and Mademoiselle d'Aiguillon in late 18th century France, for example. They both had a fight about their positions, as in who came first in terms of social position, and they started fighting and retreated to the gardens for a knife fight. But in terms of fictional depictions, the blade as a tool of dissimulation and surprise attack rather than full-on force for a duel also plays into this, and with all those different ideas of deception and untrustworthiness also brought about this idea of the dangerous and somewhat sexualized woman. And it's the reason ladies were often shown with daggers in art when their story had a more ambiguous, not entirely fully conventionally heroic streak to it. Like the story of the biblical character Judith, who is sometimes shown in art with a sword when she defeats her enemy, the General Holofernes, but sometimes with a dagger, an interpretation of the fact that she seduced the general and murdered him in his sleep, and the way in which she is depicted with a dagger seems to be linked quite a lot to that idea of exotifying her as a Middle Eastern Jewish woman, as well as sexualizing her. In many ways, the woman with a dagger and all its dangerous qualities and connotations was the first femme fatale.
Editing Claire here, back with a special segment. Claire is running late for something, so she's filming it on her phone. This time it's the play about Joan of Arc that has made everybody angry because it's queer, so I'm very excited for that. I just wanted to mention that you may think that it was a brilliant, masterful editing choice that I chose as an example, a film noir where the femme fatale has my name. it was not, and I jumped so hard when I realised that they were using my name. So you will find at the end of the video a supercut of all the times that my name was used in the clips that I selected from this film, Blonde Ice, that absolutely nobody asked for, except for perhaps other viewers called Claire. You are very welcome.
Today, the high heel has remained for many this tool of more weaponized, dangerous femininity, reclaiming those codes and subverting them. And it's also become a way to challenge, break and embrace gender presentations more widely. I first wore high heels when I had my first job, but throughout the years as I discovered my own gender presentation, I redefined heels as something else. And so I ended up putting them on again, taking them out of the closet, and by the time I was out of the closet, years later, as part of a drag king performance with my drag king persona, Eugène de la Croissance. And I think there's lots of different stories out there in terms of women who have worn, who want to wear, who have never worn high heels, different queer and trans people trying on heels and experimenting as part of their gender presentation, cis straight men who just like wearing heels. Whether they're being used to reclaim femininity, reject it, or weaponize it, they have a complex history, bringing us from daggers to drag. Thank you so much for watching. Have you ever worn heels? What do you associate them with the most? Let me know. If you've enjoyed this video and you are not yet subscribed, I would invite you to do so. And you can also have a look at weird sword gender stuff I do elsewhere, like my podcast, Bustles and Broadswords, and my webcomic, Girls' School of Knighthood. Stay safe, sword lovers, and see you in another video.
Claire! You'll never be happy here, Claire. Sit down, Claire. Claire? You ought to see a doctor, Claire. Hi, Claire. 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 Claire, I warn you.